Hello, my name is Dan Heaton and I am the co-host of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast. The following interview was taken from episode 32 of the podcast. If you enjoy this interview and would like to hear more, please consider subscribing to the podcast via the usual podcast apps and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Thank you.
So, Bill, thanks again for joining us today. I want to talk a bit about your background and some of the things that's happening for yourself in politics today. So we know you're known as an ex-candidate for the Conservatives and an MEP for UKIP and as a classical liberal. Can you tell us a little bit about what first led you into politics?
Well, first of all, I appreciate you saying I'm known as a classical liberal, because one of my great regrets about my political career has been that I haven't been able to properly communicate that. You know, I'm seen as many things, and frankly, a classical liberal is the label I like. I began in politics almost by accident, because prior to that, for 20 years, I'd been in the steel industry, still stockholding, buying and selling from all around the world, and it was stainless steel mainly. It was a pretty good career that I had, and things were, especially in the West Midlands, that's huge. But then during Gordon Brown's recession, I lost my job, and for the first time ever, I couldn't get another one. I was actually at a loose end, and having spent one day trying to watch daytime TV and realising that was the route to madness, I thought, well, I'm going to go and volunteer and do things while I look for a job. So I helped out at the local church that was trying to get some restoration with that, but also the Conservatives were getting active in Dudley at the time, which the whole of the Black Country is a key swing area for anybody who wants to win an election. And they were looking for volunteers. I started helping them out, doing a bit of leafleting and getting involved. And it soon became clear that they thought there was an opportunity for me to help more. So they put me on campaign executive training and so on and so forth to learn more about the game of politics. And they gave me an opportunity to stand. Being an ardent Thatcherite and lover of President Reagan, they put me in the most hardcore left-wing Labour area of Dudley to stand as a councillor, and I got well and truly whooped, but I got the taste for it at that point, and so that's how I got into it.
Fantastic. I do remember back in UKIP days, you putting out a lot of Ronald Reagan quotes on your Facebook timeline, which I always enjoyed seeing.
Well, I actually used to use them in the Parliament as well, and there was a little game that the staff that worked with us as MEPs used to sit down and they do a bingo where they would try and find the Thatcher or Reagan quotes that I slipped into my speeches.
Oh, fantastic. Well, so you were there as a MEP for UKIP for a long time. Like us, you've left the party. Where do you think it went wrong for UKIP?
The main problem that we had was that, there's no two ways about it. Nigel Farage is the most effective and inspiring politician for patriotic right of centre politics that there has been for many years. And I when I joined UKIP, started 2011, it was down at sort of 1% in the polls. But Nigel then recruited the people around him, and the rest is history. But what then began to happen was that people within the organisation started to jostle for position. That Nigel couldn't always get things done as efficiently and as effectively as he wanted to, and he got more and more frustrated, more and more cheesed off with the whole thing. And by the end of, and I saw him change as a man. He went from being a pretty chilled out, relaxed, fun-loving individual to red in the face and angry most of the time. And I saw this going on, and then when he decided he'd had enough and he wanted to get out of there and get some freedom and earn some money, because believe it or not, with the sanctions that used to get put on him through the Parliament, he really didn't end up earning much money that way. He left, and then a big power struggle that we're all aware of to try and replace him. And what he did wrong, and I'll always say this, was he didn't properly bring through a successor. So there was a great big fight, and we broke into factions. There was the more liberal side of things, which I was involved in. There were nationalists who eventually won the day, more or less with the Gerard Batten cohort. And there were people who were more Well, I jokingly used to call Patrick O'Flynn and people like that pinkos, but it was more in jest than anything else. But more social democrats within the party. So there was a real battle royal went on. And when eventually, after all of the farce and turmoil of all of the madness that went on, we ended up with Gerard Batten rising to be leader. Now, a man who I've known for years and personally, I'd always thought was okay to have a glass of Coke with or something. But everyone knew that man was an extreme nationalist, and some of his views were not what I believe UKIP was about. And I actually spoke to him and said to him, look, if you're going to take this on, you must focus on Brexit. And we had a conversation where that was assured to me. Well, it didn't work out that way. And not only are the views that Batten and some of his senior cohort put forward views that I would never, ever be able to represent or share, but they're also incredibly unpopular. So he almost created the cult of Batten with new members joining, making sure it would remain hard, extreme nationalist. But at the same time as the new members came, the general public was looking and thinking, hang on a minute, this isn't for me. And nobody seemed to have learned the lesson of the BNP. And, I think that unfortunately, Gerard destroyed the party as any kind of effective force in British politics. And I shall never forgive him for that. I know there's a lot of his supporters who'll never forgive me for leaving and standing against it. But I've never made a secret of the fact that I am, as you rightly said earlier, a classical liberal. I cannot condone, support, or be part of an extreme nationalist movement.
No, rightly so. So after that, you were briefly an MEP for the Libertarian Party. How did that come about? Why did you leave, and what do you think's next for that party?
I left. I became an MEP for that party because partly I wanted to make a statement that libertarianism was something that people should have a look at, because it's not discussed. People don't talk about libertarianism, in the general public. There might be sort of little rooms in a side of a pub somewhere, but not really in the general discourse. So I wanted to give a publicity boost for the idea of libertarianism. But I'll be honest enough to say that although there's some fabulous people within that party, the way it was run from the top was always going to be a case of a little fiefdom where people just sit around and have a chat and agree about how right they are, but there's never any serious intention of actually doing anything, achieving anything. And when Nigel told me that the Brexit party was going to happen, I felt it was my duty to back what he was doing at the time, because and also I didn't feel any problem with leaving the Libertarian Party, because frankly, under the people who were running it at that time, it might be different now, but under the certainly one or two people running it at that time, it was never going to go anywhere. So I felt my duty was to back Nigel, because we were still fighting for Brexit.
And that moves us on nicely. So thank you for that. The saying about the Brexit Party, which he became a member of, is now effectively in hibernation from certainly what we can see. What do you think's next for classical liberal politics in Britain?
I don't think the Brexit Party is what's next for us. That really isn't. I mean, the only effective use for that party was to apply pressure. The people at the top, excluding Nigel, who I do believe is a classical liberal, but the other people at the top are not cut from that cloth. So where next? Well, that's a very difficult question, and one I'm toying with myself, because I'm only 50. I'm not ready to retire particularly, but I'm casting around and looking and trying to figure out where is the best home for classical liberals, where would we be able to make a real difference and impact and work without infighting, battles, constant aggravation, but actually be able to work together to achieve something. And the honest answer is I'm looking, and when I find out, I'll make sure everyone knows. But at the moment, I'm not confident that any one option is giving me the total happiness that I require before I make a plunge again, because it's a tough old game being in politics, especially when you've got a bit of a reputation behind you. You become a target for all sorts of things, and if I'm going to do it, I'm only going to do it with a party that I actually believe in, and it's worth making the sacrifices and taking the aggro with.
Yeah, absolutely, and rightly so. It is tough, even when you're not nearly as well known as yourself. So outside of politics, and you do some boxing and your excellent walking videos. What are you up to, and what do you think's next for you? Perhaps leaving some of the politics aside.
Well, I was in the process of setting up a charity, and it's called Support Futures. And the idea of the charity is that there's a lot of, even prior to this lockdown, there were a lot of issues with mental health, with younger people maybe going off the rails into gangs, into drugs. And I and others felt that there was a need for a chance to get people into a boxing environment, into a gym environment, a sport environment, where they could be sponsored to go through that. At the same time, they would have to do a little bit of learning, some basic employability skills, and also mentoring of people who they would respect, who would talk to them about the issues that were going on. And that's all lined up. But the issue, of course, with that was that we had a whole range of fundraising events we got lined up, and we did the first one, where I got the opportunity of sitting on stage and interviewing one of my heroes, Frank Bruno, and we had a really good turnout in Wolverhampton for that one. But then everything else has been cancelled because of this lockdown, so that's on hold, unfortunately. But it'll start again as soon as we're released from the fear of this virus that kills less than 1% of people. And then on top of that, what else have I been doing? Well, I've been working hard on trying to get rid of some of the Brussels belly. That's why I do the boxing. That's why I do. You might see a lot of videos of me walking, because I'm spending a lot of time on trying to get fit. I've got a lot of ambition and hope and life left in me, and I want to make sure that physically I'm still up to the job of pursuing my interests with the same passion as I always have. So that's a pretty tough job when you're massively overweight, as I was, and still I've got too much timber on, but I'm working hard. I've shifted 2 stone since lockdown, so I'm working hard at it.
Well, I might have gathered that 2 stone from you, I think. So just before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
I think the main thing I would say to anyone who's listening to this, who's obviously got an interest in politics, obviously to be listening to this kind of thing, what I would say is that no matter how difficult it seems, no matter how unpleasant it can be at times, and understanding that you will be ripped apart at times, because during my 10 years, crikey, I've been ripped apart regularly. But if you believe in something, don't just sit in the pub with a couple of mates talking about it. Don't just type something on Twitter or whatever. Actually actively pursue that interest and try to make a difference. I never believed when I joined UKIP in 2011 that we'd be here now on the verge of completely leaving the EU transitional period, having won a referendum, having spent time as an MEP, a bloke from a poor comprehensive school in the middle of Wolverhampton, to have done the things that I've done with it, and to have achieved, as part of a bigger team, some amazing victories. So I would say go for it, but be aware that it's going to be tough. But there's no better feeling than knowing that you've stood for what you believe in and really giving it hell to get there. And I would recommend it to anyone. I think it's really worth doing.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Bill. Really, really good to hear from you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.